Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Angela and I'm an angelic Arcturian. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you are a returning subscriber, welcome back. And thank you so much for sharing some of your precious time with me today. So in this video, we are going to talk about understanding third dimensional consciousness. And this is the current state of consciousness that we are existing in right now. So before we can really understand other levels of consciousness, it's important that we understand how to navigate and deal with this third dimensional reality that we currently exist in. I did another video called Understanding Multidimensional Consciousness. If you are interested, it talks about the different dimensions and levels of consciousness that reside within those dimensions. So if you're interested, take a look at that video. But it's not necessary to watch that one to understand this one. They just kind of go together a little bit, and it expands upon other dimensions and levels of consciousness. But for this video today, we are going to be focusing on understanding and navigating third dimensional consciousness. So let's get into it. So the third dimensional consciousness, as I like to refer to it, is the consciousness of suffering, or the Satanic consciousness. And this is the idea of duality and separation, of good and evil, black and white, wrong and right. So this is a paradigm of duality and illusion and separation and physicality. So these things only exist in the third dimension. Outside of the third dimension, we are primarily non-physical. There is no duality, no fear, no suffering, none of those things. We serve God differently outside of the third dimension. The third dimension is more about our own soul's evolution through the ideas and paradigms of suffering. So it can get really brutal in the third dimension. It's one of the most difficult dimensions to navigate. But we also get the most growth and evolution from this dimensional consciousness. So it's kind of an important role for every soul's evolution to be able to go through these many human lives and evolve our souls through the paradigms of separation, the ideas of good and evil, and suffering. So the third dimension is made up of actually 4 dimensions. So the first and second dimensions, as well as the fourth dimension, make up the third dimension. So the first dimension is the consciousness of air and water and gas and things that really don't have a physical form but still are very present on Earth. They have a very low level consciousness. And then the second dimension is more the dimension of animals and trees and plants, which is a higher level of consciousness, but still not self-aware. So the first and second dimensions bring us into the third dimension, and when we get into the third dimension, that's when we really start to become self-aware, and we start carrying out this idea of duality and separation. And the fourth dimension is basically the transitional dimension between the third and fifth. So the fourth dimension is where we reside when we begin to become awakened from the illusions of the third dimension, and we begin to evolve our consciousness towards the fifth. So 1 through 4 basically make up 3. I know that's a little weird and complicated, but that's just how it works in this dimension. So one thing that the third dimensional consciousness has that other dimensions don't is fear. Fear is exclusive only to the third dimension and does not exist outside of it. So when we're playing within a fear paradigm, that's really a catalyst for duality. Because when human consciousness doesn't understand what's going on and also has this paradigm of fear, it can really create a lot of dark energy. Because when we're playing here in the third dimension, we are constantly faced with choices based out of love or fear. So the core of the experience here is we make these different choices based out of love or fear, and whatever those choices are really create our experience here, as well as seeing through the lens of our own consciousness. We tend to project our consciousness into this third dimensional field, which is actually a quantum field. It does not actually exist. It only exists through the lens of our own consciousness. And because of the way that vibration and energy move in the third dimension, the slower an object vibrates, the more dense it becomes and the more physical it seems. But the whole existence of the third dimension is only a projection that we are able to see, touch, taste, hear, and feel through our five senses and our own consciousness. But outside of this, if you take away the senses, the body, the consciousness, there is no more reality. So that's essentially death. But when we die, we understand, because we basically wake up out of this reality and we go, oh wow, that was such a trip. Like, it's a crazy adventure, right? But none of it's actually real. It's a projection of our individual consciousness as well as our collective consciousness. So we're continually creating our reality based off of our consciousness and where we are at in our consciousness evolution. So we're continually evolving, we're continually growing, and we're learning through these paradigms of suffering. And part of this paradigm of suffering is the idea of Satan and God, good and evil, black and white, so positive and negative polarities. And humans have done a lot of creating paradigms within paradigms of fearful thinking and suffering based on their level of consciousness. But it's really time for humanity as a whole to experience more, to evolve past fear. And the only way to evolve past fear is to understand that fear is part of the illusion, that it does not exist outside of this third dimension. And once we understand this and we begin to choose love instead of fear, then we really start to begin to evolve away from the suffering and move into lighter and higher frequencies. So it's important to understand that these ideas of Satan and demons and hell and all of that stuff only exists within this third dimensional awareness. It does not exist in higher dimensions. It's part of the illusory experience that we have chosen to have on planet Earth or any third dimensional planet. It is part of the experience that we desired to forget who we are, to navigate through these paradigms of fear and love with our ego. And through this experience of dark and light, good and bad, right or wrong, we learn, we evolve, we grow. When we do things that are perceived as wrong, we face consequences. And through those consequences, we grow and evolve. When we do things that are based out of love, we experience consequences of that too, which are very positive. So whichever way we choose to go, and because we have free will, we are constantly faced with the choice between fear and love at every moment. And it's important to understand when you're trying to navigate the 3D reality is that there's a lot of deception and illusion in this reality. And so it's important that we really learn how to tune into our own selves and our own souls and our own intuition, so that we can learn to discern truth from fiction, because it is riddled with darkness here, it's riddled with deception, it is riddled with a lot of dark energy, but it also has a lot of light energy. And which experience we have here is going to depend on our level of consciousness and how aware we are of ourselves and the reality that we're in. So when one becomes awakened, it means they have become awakened to the fact that they are in an illusory experience and that they're being navigated by this darker aspect that we refer to as the ego, which primary job of the ego is to keep us alive by giving us the ability to judge what's right or wrong or good or bad. But it's also here to kind of create contrasting experiences for us. The ego really loves to trick us into thinking that we're not good enough, we're not gonna get there, we're never gonna make it. Like, the ego can be a very negative aspect to us until we kind of learn to separate ourselves from that ego and become aware of it, and then really begin to navigate from this space of balanced duality within us. So there's a lot to learn on the third dimension. I mean, I could sit here for hours and talk about all the things that we learn in 3D. There's so much growth to be had here. But ultimately, the choice comes down to every day, every moment, choosing love or fear. And so when we're trying to discern truth from fiction, that is a very good place to go to. Anything that is born of fear, any idea, belief system, construct, ideology, religion that is coming from a place of fear, like, if you don't do this, you're gonna go to hell, you know, anything like that, like demons are coming to get you, all of that is fear frequency. Okay, so if you really want to speed this process of navigating third dimensional awareness, understand that anything that comes from fear is a lie. It's falsity, it's not true, it's illusion. Anything that comes from love is truth, and that is the God vibration, source vibration, and that's going to lead us into higher vibrations and consciousness ourselves. So the more we choose love, the more we begin to navigate out of satanic awareness and into God awareness. But it can be really confusing knowing which is fear and which is love. But ultimately, when we get this certain level of awareness, we can start to see very clearly what is fear and what is love, and be able to choose accordingly. So while ideally you could say that good and evil do exist here, it's just part of this dimension, this consciousness awareness. It does not exist outside of this. And once we learn to transcend fear, which is ultimately what we're here to do, transcend fear and learn to choose love instead, develop compassion, develop empathy, develop connectedness with ourselves and each other, then that's when we really begin to move into the fourth and fifth and up dimensions, as we start to gain more awareness of ourselves and our reality. So that's a big part of the challenge of third dimensional consciousness. And what tends to happen here often is humans can really get stuck in rigid thinking and rigid belief systems. And so when a human doesn't want to evolve, or they're just not open-minded enough to evolve, they can really get stuck in these rigid paradigms and belief systems and refuse to evolve, which, you know, there's no right or wrong to that. It's just a matter of how long do you want to stay in satanic suffering. And in order to really move past satanic suffering, we have to be open-minded enough to accept new ideas, new concepts, and new ways of living that are not based in fear, but based in love. And this is what the human consciousness is experiencing right now. They are learning the ways of maybe navigating from fear is only creating more fear and more suffering, and maybe we should try navigating from love instead. But for the human consciousness, fear is a very powerful vibration. And so when the human being is unawakened and unconscious and unaware of fear and love paradigms and how duality plays out in the third dimension, and they're completely identified with their ego, there's no separation with the ego, they believe that their thoughts are them, and they completely identify with that, that really creates a lot of suffering for that individual. And until that individual or collective, it works out both ways, really becomes awakened to this idea that, you know, that suffering isn't any fun and that fear is an illusion, then and it usually takes a lot of suffering for a human being to get there, then it's kind of like we just kind of snap open, we crack open and we become awakened, and then we're able to finally get a bigger picture on things. As soon as we're able to separate ourselves from our ego just a little bit, and be open to new ideas just a little bit, then the door can really begin to open for that being or that collective to really begin to evolve. So there is a lot to be learned, from third dimensional consciousness. And that is why, so many of us gravitate to it. In fact, I think it is a part of every soul's evolution. I think every soul has to go through third dimensional consciousness in order to evolve to higher consciousness. So it is a part of the process, and we learn so much from it in so many ways. But the point I really want to make with this video is that the ideas of Satan, hell, demons, angels, all of that duality, fear and love, only exists here. And as soon as you die, there is no fear, there are no demons, there is no hell. None of that shit really exists except in this third dimensional illusory experience. So it's important to be aware of that as you're navigating, and just understand that this stuff is playing out so that your consciousness can evolve. So when we're dealing with the choice between fear and love in any moment, what we choose shapes our experience on planet Earth, and also decides how many lifetimes we're going to have to go through in order to evolve our consciousness enough to be able to escape the paradigms of fear and move into love. So collectively, individually, this is how humanity's consciousness is playing this out. And we play it out through these ideas of right and wrong, good and bad, dark and light, etc., etc. But the truth is, none of that stuff really exists outside of this dimension. So just be aware of that. It's part of this process of evolution. And once we transcend third dimensional consciousness, that's it. There is no more. And so there is no hell, there is no demons. All of that stuff, while it exists on the third dimension, it's not real. It's just part of the illusion. So keep that in mind when you're navigating this reality, and understand that it's just part of this consciousness, this awareness, and that there is much, much more that exists beyond this that has nothing to do with fear, Satan, hell, burning forever and eternal suffering. Your suffering and your hell is on planet Earth, because you are in satanic consciousness, you are in suffering consciousness, and that is as close to hell as you're ever going to get. And you always have the choice to exit that hell at any time by choosing love. So I hope that gives you some idea or some clarity on how this third dimensional consciousness works. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.